And I call on Deputy Desi Ellis. Deputy Ellis, you have 4 minutes.
Good. Minister, for 18 years now, early board breakfast clubs have been a huge success in Ballymun. Last year alone, 58,840 breakfasts were served to 5 DESH schools in the Ballymun area. Some of the funding for this scheme was provided through the Ballymun Local Drugs and Alcohol Task Force, as well as other sources from different departments. The BEST project was tasked with managing this scheme, and presently 18 staff, which are mainly part-time, administer and operate it. Children who are served a wholesome breakfast in the morning are better equipped to face a day of learning and concentration in these schools. Some of these children come from very deprived backgrounds, so they need all the supports they can get and all the help they can get. The loss of these services is a huge blow, not only to the children, but to their families who rely on these supports and help. Staff employed receive special training, as well as attending courses in all aspects of child protection, and are really well trained and are up to the highest standards. The social interaction between children who meet with their friends, teachers, staff has helped to shape their future. The benefits of sitting down together and having a proper meal in a proper environment should not be underestimated. There is a real fear that standards that we're improving will drop and children may also lose out, especially those from minority backgrounds. The BEST project has looked to secure funding, but has run into a brick wall, with the excuse that employing staff is not necessary and that schools can handle this with a snack and a lunch. I've spoken to some of the schools. Some of the schools will struggle very, very hard to do this. This is putting huge strains on the schools who in some cases do not have the necessary resources. The withdrawal of funding by the task force is regrettable, especially seeing as no other funding stream has been identified. Minister, is there any other funding available from any department? For example, the Department of Education and Science, the Social Protection or TUSLA. Is there anywhere funding could be got to continue employing this staff and to help alleviate this situation? There is now an immediate threat and notices have been served to staff. So very shortly we will lose that project in Ballymun, and this would be a disaster. It has worked so well for 18 years in spite of huge problems, and we have a lot of children that are at risk in this area. Thank you.
Minister has 4 minutes.
Thanks, Deputy, for bringing this issue up on topical issues today, but just also to acknowledge Deputy Noel Rock has been in discussions with me on this for over a month now. So just to give you a bit of background towards it, that the funding towards school meals is provided from my department for over 1,580 schools and other organisations and supports over 248,000 children. And it's probably going to come to about 54 million in 2018, which represents an increase of 6.5 million over the previous year. And the reason that that's important to say is because of the really valuable contribution and effect on these children's lives, as you've just described, Deputy, is real and it's tangible. It's not something that's fuzzy or woolly. I think the objective of the scheme is to provide regular, nutritious food to children who are unable, due to lack of maybe good quality food, to take full advantage of their education as being provided to them. And in recent years, priority for new applications for funding has been given to schools which are part of the Department of Education and Skills Initiative for Disadvantaged Schools, DESH, in line with the National Policy Framework for Children and Young People, Better Outcomes, Brighter Futures. So the schools in Ballymun which are affected by the proposed closure of the Breakfast Club all have DESH status and all receive funding from my department under the Schools Meal Programme, and that's not going to change. The breakfast clubs in Ballymun, and you call them the early bird clubs, are operated by the Ballymun Education Support Team School Completion Programme and have been part of the Ballymun Local Drugs and Alcohol Task Force funding provision through the Department of Health funding for the past 18 years. And the channel of funding is the City of Dublin Youth Service Board and City of Dublin ETB. So, according to the Ballymun Local Drugs and Alcohol Task Force, the allocation for 2017 school calendar year was €122,716 and €87,716 to the end of June for 2018. And the funding provided is used for food, for staffing, for people to prepare the food and supervise the breakfast clubs in the 7 schools during the school's term, insurance, training, etc., and has now been administered centrally by an organisation called Best SCP. The rationale for the Ballymun Local Drugs and Alcohol Task Force funding these was a way around supporting school retention and participation, especially for those families struggling to provide basic supports for their children in the morning. And in an effort to maximise its funding and to focus more sharply on the individuals, children's and families with most acute needs or risks due to drug or alcohol issues, the Task Force in its allocation for 2018 only approved funding up until the end of June and wrote to Best SCP and local schools principals to advise them of this. The Task Force also allocated additional resources to engage an independent contractor to work with each school to provide support to make sure that the necessary applications and arrangements to ensure the breakfasts continued in their schools through the day and schools' meal programmes, that they were embedded directly in each school going forward. And that contractor has met the Ballymun Principals Network and has been in touch with each school to assist them to assess how the breakfast clubs could be provided by them in their own respective schools going forward in the future. So the school meals programme had a particular focus on the provision of breakfast clubs because they provide very positive outcomes for vulnerable children in terms of energy levels, punctuality and school attendance. The scheme provides funding in either a breakfast or a snack club for all children and a lunch for up to 90% of the children in DEIS schools for the entire school year from September to June. And at present, all of the schools affected are funded for all of the children for a snack club and a lunch club. And if the individual schools wish to receive funding for the breakfast clubs, they would lose their funding for the snacks clubs, but obviously they'd get breakfast instead. So my department does provide funding for food costs to a number of SCPs throughout the country. And the SCP coordinator, who is generally based in one of the largest schools in an area, submits an application on behalf of the schools under its remit. They distribute the funding to the constituent schools and then the school operates the club. And occasionally the SCP will operate the club in one school, drawing on pupils in the other schools under its remit. To date, my department hasn't received an application from Best SCP to participate in the school's meal programme to date, and if the application is received, obviously we'll consider it favourably. And in fact, there's a new application, a new round of school meal programmes going to be announced next week. So if they want to, to apply, they certainly can. What I will say to you, Deputy, is that there was a meeting that was scheduled to happen today. It didn't happen. I can only encourage you, if you have any influence in any way, to ensure that that meeting does happen and that an application is made.
Yes, thank you, Minister. I do acknowledge that the Ballymun Drugs Task Force have made it very clear that they won't be continuing the funding, 122,000. And I think there's an acknowledgement from most of the schools. I spoke to a lot of the principals that they can handle a certain amount. But there's also, it's very clear that this has worked very well over the years. And I know your department provides a snack and a lunch, and that is fairly reasonable. But the reality is that the parents that I have spoken to and the people that I've spoken to have said that these breakfast clubs have been remarkable in how they've shaped the children in the area and how they've interacted with children, and the benefits that this has brought has been massive. It's not anywhere near 122,000 in terms of, because I think there's an acknowledgement that the food aspect, in terms of getting the food for all these schools, the 5 DEIS schools that we're talking about, that can be got. It's the staff and those people that were employed there. And one of the principals was very clear to me that he would find it very, very difficult to manage without the people that were there working those schools. He has made it very clear it's going to be extremely difficult. So that is, something that we have to take into account. And if the benefits are so good from what everyone is telling me and what I've seen over the years from the schools, I just feel that for the sake of a very small amount of money when it comes to maintaining staff or, keeping that staff in place. It just seems crazy to me to let this go. And I once again plead with you. I will try and talk to Best and other people in regards to engaging. They have said that they did engage, and I acknowledge that Deputy Rock had spoken to them and he had spoken to yourself. But the answers they were getting back was that there's no place to go, no place and no department to go to get funding for staff. And that was the answer they got. And I think that has sort of it has sort of impacted very heavily on them in terms of the approach they had. I think it's a shame, and I would really urge you to see if you could re-look at this and engage and have a look and see can the funding be provided.
Minister, 2 minutes, no more.
I think it's quite obvious how emotionally engaged you're in this, right? And I think that's, I don't mean to be patronising, but I think that's really lovely to see, right? So I'm not refusing anybody's help. The only thing my department does is either give the money for the food, which we give and we gladly give, and we already know and appreciate the impact it has, and that's not going to change. The second thing that we do is we provide money through CE schemes. We haven't reduced that either. And again, if anybody wants to approach us for new initiatives or to move places, then that's certainly something that we can look at. The crux of the matter here is that for some reason, Dublin City Council and the ETB have decided to stop funding what they've been funding for 18 years with no explanation and no obvious reason as to why they're doing it. And I think the crux, and I'm not skirting my responsibilities here, and I'd gladly go with you and organise a meeting, and it's no problem, but the crux here has to be asked. The question is that why the task force saw fit to stop doing something that they saw a value in for 18 years. Now, the only thing I can do in the short term is to genuinely encourage you through the SCP to apply for that exceptional money where we do have cases where the SCP coordinators go around and help in schools. And if I can assist in that way, I'll gladly do it. But the real elephant in the room here is why an organisation that's funded by the state through the Department of Health saw a value in doing something for 18 years and now doesn't see a value in doing it anymore. And I think they need to be made responsible to at least answer to us to find out why they stopped giving that source of money, what those people that were going to be employed, what they expect them to do in a rehabilitative nature, that they were getting rehabilitation out of in the last 18 years, and obviously they weren't the same people for the whole length of time, but they need to answer some very serious questions as to why they saw fit to stop funding it, what they're going to use the funding for in the future if they're not going to use it for these 7 schools in Ballymun. But in my own personal remit, the schools will continue to be supplied with the food. That's absolutely a given. If you can encourage the meeting that was going to happen today, along with Deputy Noel Rock, if the two of us could work together to make sure that that meeting does happen in the next couple of days and an application is put into the SCP, then we obviously will look on it on its own merits. But it certainly has to be reflective of the practice and the goodwill and the positive outcomes that have happened in the 7 schools in Ballymun, of which I grew up in and went to one of them myself, for God's sake, years ago.